On February 12, 2026, the castle of Alden Biesen was transformed into a fortified zone. Behind its walls, 27 European heads of state gathered for a summit that would immediately sink into a profound deadlock. The tension was driven by a ticking clock. It had been 17 months since Mario Draghi delivered a report warning that, without a radical shift in investment, the European model faced an existential threat to its survival. Draghi's math was specific. To keep pace with global competitors and rebuild its own defense, Europe needs to find an additional 750 to 800 billion euros every year. That is a spending gap twice the size of the Marshall Plan. While the logical solution is for the continent to borrow the money together, the leaders inside the castle remained paralyzed. Despite the scale of the crisis, key member states flatly refused to act on any proposal for shared debt. Choosing a risk of decline over a proven financial solution is an immense trade-off. But the mechanism that saved the Union in 2020 has now become its most rigid political constraint. In the summer of 2020, European leaders broke a decades-old fiscal taboo. Facing a collapsing economy, they authorized a breakthrough recovery package called NextGenerationEU. The European Union acted as a unified bloc to borrow 807 billion euros. This massive fund was divided, 386 billion euros in loans and 338 billion in grants. Individual member states remain legally responsible for repaying the loans on their own national books. This experiment proved that common European debt is viable. Global markets trusted the Union's bonds, turning them into a benchmark asset almost overnight. However, the math behind those 338 billion euros in grants shifts the burden. While member states don't have to repay this portion individually, the shared European budget must absorb the entire cost, starting in 2028. This creates a steep financial cliff. Repaying that principal requires 15 billion euros every year, an annual deficit only filled by new European taxes. Currently, a shared contribution on non-recycled plastic generates just 6 billion euros a year, less than half of what is needed. Legally, the path forward is blocked. European treaties generally forbid mutualized debt. The 2020 borrowing only survived legal challenges because it was labeled a temporary response to an exceptional crisis. This is the political red line for the frugal nations, led by states like the Netherlands and Germany. They argue that shared debt was a one-off emergency measure, and they refuse to let northern taxpayers permanently fund the deficits of the South. With math forcing a repayment, treaties forbidding a permanent structure, and politics preventing a new agreement, the deadlock reinforces itself from every angle. This continental paralysis is a larger version of the localized dysfunction found within Belgium itself. The Belgian deadlock is driven by a familiar dynamic. The wealthier northern region of Flanders resists continuous subsidies for the South. The resulting gridlock is so severe that the country has gone hundreds of days at a time without a functional government. This identical tension now dictates European policy. The frugal Northern Bloc applies this regional logic to the entire continent, demanding structural reforms and austerity before they will ever consider financial solidarity. Mutualized debt generates intense political friction, but it is also the only mathematical tool capable of making these investments bearable. Belgium demonstrates this every time it issues federal bonds at lower rates than its regions could ever secure alone. Back at the 2026 summit, the standoff remains unchanged. The frugal nations continue to demand budgetary virtue as a prerequisite for any conversation about joint funding. Leaders like Emmanuel Macron argue that this focus on ideological purity misses the point. They see common debt not as a choice, but as a requirement for Europe's geopolitical survival. The math is indifferent to the debate. Without the 800 billion euro annual investment Draghi identified, the European model of social protection and individual freedom simply cannot be sustained against global competitors. In a competitive global landscape, clinging to fiscal virtue without possessing actual financial power is a luxury the continent can no longer afford.